Hi, everybody. Good to see you again. Today, I think we have a fun and interesting lecture. Of course, I think they are all fun and interesting. But today, we're going to really zero in a lot on uses of mass media with reference to PR work, public relations. I think this is really a very interesting concept, one that, again, I trust you are willing to go look into more and further. I think that PR work impacts everything. It certainly impacts Christian schools. It impacts churches. How are we presenting ourselves? What face are we putting forward to the public? And then just several things. I always think that honesty is the best policy, but several things that we need to consider. Those of you going into business, perhaps someday you'll be helping them. And these are some issues that you can think through, perhaps help a company with. All right? So today, dealing with PR and mass media. Something I want you to recognize, go ahead and write down in your notes, that what is an organization? An organization is comprised of individuals and physical entities and the objects with set structures and hierarchies and the dynamic interplay of patterned relationships through which individuals enact or construct their environment through their communications. Let me read that one more time. An organization, individuals, physical entities, and objects with set structures and hierarchies, and the dynamic interplay of patterned relationships through which individuals enact or construct their environment through their communication. In other words, an organization is obviously people, but an organization can also include the physical entities and the objects. For example, an organization would include the buildings and the maintenance required and perhaps some of the groundwork. All of those things work together as far as the organization, as well as what's the dynamic interplay of relationships. And that's very, very crucial. How is the communication occurring between various departments? Then organizational communication refers to the process of creating, sending, and receiving the messages within this complex system, which includes a net of integrated internal and external relationships comprising individuals working to manage organizational ambiguity and achieve an outcome or a goal. So we've got the creating, the sending, and the receiving of the messages. And then keep in mind we're dealing with the internal. Okay, so I work at Maranatha. So what are the messages that are sent within Maranatha itself? And then as well as what are some of the external communications? How do we communicate with future students? How do we communicate with some of the pastors? How do we communicate with um, perhaps our alumni? So we cannot limit the communication to only that which is internal, because when we think of PR work, it is the communication as well with those that are on the outside of the organization and the external communication there. I love this little set of diagrams you're going to see, and I think it's actually very telling of some organizations. First of all, we see as marketing requested. It's a three-tier seat on a tree. That's what marketing requested. But here's how sales ordered it. They've got the three, but notice they have the three ropes. How did the engineering department design it? Well, that kind of has some issues there, doesn't it? So how did production manufacture it? Again, I think we have some miscommunication occurring. As maintenance installed it, and finally, what the customer really wanted. All of that just in a fun, lighthearted way to say communication is really crucial. You have to have good communication both internally, you have to have good communication externally, or you could perhaps have a disaster on your hands. And we are going to discuss a few businesses who did have some disasters and how those could perhaps have been avoided. So organizational communication, again, is both the internal and the external communication of an organization, and those are crucial for the success and the credibility of the organization, how people see you, how people perceive you. There's the old adage that perception is often reality to some of those on the outside. Even though perception isn't always right, perception is oftentimes reality. So we have to do the best that we can in order to communicate our business or our church or our school in the best light possible. Now, there's some different aspects to this. What do we need to recognize? Well, first of all, organizations have to recognize the need for holism, Holism. Holism is the recognition that an organization is more than the sum of its parts. It really includes everything working together well. Again, holism is the recognition that an organization is more than the sum of its parts. You can have all these various parts, but if they don't work together, you'll hear the old adage, if they're not a well-oiled machine, then it doesn't matter how many parts you have. If you think of a college such as Maranatha, obviously we've got various departments. You've got the business department, you've got the communications department, you've got some of the vice presidents, but then you've got an awful lot of other things. How about the dining commons and that which that area that feeds all the students? We also have the mail room, and that's very, very crucial for the sending and receiving of all the packages that we have. How about the Department of Maintenance? You know, if we didn't have all those really well-educated people helping all of the lights to go on and helping the electricity run well and helping everything run adequately, then it doesn't matter if we've got faculty that understands their various areas. We have to have also an IT department that can help with the online. Do you understand? So we've got all these various parts, but holism says I can't just have A, B, C, D, E, and F never working together. I've got to have A, B, C, D, E, F, and they all are this wonderful working machine. That's holism as far as an organization is concerned. Then we recognize the need for equifinity. Equifinity says that an organization can reach its goals in one of several ways. Equifinity, an organization can reach its goals in one of several ways. Right? So let's say that your church wants to bring in more students, perhaps more children from the community. Well, you could say, well, perhaps we'll just buy another bus. That is certainly one way of reaching your goal of getting more children into your Sunday school classes, right, and to reaching the community. But perhaps instead of a bus, you might be able to purchase 3 vans. And the vans then could spread out to various parts of the community. You could also perhaps enroll the help of some of your own church members and say, would you be willing to pick up 2 or 3 children en route? You see, there's not just one way, and sometimes organizations or perhaps leadership gets focused and they say, here's my idea, and this is the only thing we'll run with. That idea might work, but there's great wisdom in leadership hearing all the input and then saying, all right, since we could reach this via A or B or C or D, let's look at everything involved in trying to get all these kids here. Next, we say there can be negative entropy. Negative entropy, that's that an organization has to remain dynamic or it will falter. An organization must remain dynamic. We cannot simply say we were doing well in 1985, so let's just keep that same process. Well, that may have been true for 1985, but wherein is the difference now? Has society changed? Has communication changed? At the college level, obviously you are now taking online courses, and good for you. What if Maranatha had never instituted that? What if Maranatha had said, no, no, when we were started, when Dr. Cedarholm started this college, students had to come into the classroom, and so that's how we'll remain. Well, I think we really would have shortchanged ourselves, and I think that Naomi Ledgerwood did an absolutely phenomenal job of helping get all these online courses off the ground. So Maranatha recognized, yes, there is certainly still the place for the brick and mortar classroom, but as technology is enhanced, if we don't tap into the possible external ability of online classes, then perhaps we'll have students who just go elsewhere. And we really want to be able to help train you as much as possible. Finally, we have to recognize within organizations requisite variety. Requisite variety. That is that an organization must be aware of and adjust to external environments where it will cease to exist. You have to be aware of external environments. All right, so negative entropy is you can't just stay the same. You cannot stay the same. Requisite variety says we have to stay the same because of external things that may change. Let me give you an example of requisite variety that I am familiar with, okay, a situation that I'm familiar with. There was a company that was doing really, really well. Um, they actually had the global market on the creation of cappuccino machines with respect to cruise ships. All right, they were the first ones to come out and patent um, a cappuccino machine that had two flavors. Okay, so if you think of going to Quick Trip or going to a local gas station, and you can choose a variety of flavors of your cappuccino. All right, well, this is what this company did. It created these um, cappuccino machines that had multiple flavors, and they patented it and just did phenomenally. Had a booming business. They actually had placed several of them, their machines, within McDonald's. You could go to McDonald's, and I remember what their insignia looked like. And so when I would go to McDonald's, I would look and yeah, I know the company that made that. And they just were prospering, doing wonderfully. And you watched their business expand, and they added to their building. And a couple of our Maranatha students worked there, and I remember one of the students coming to me and saying, "Mrs. Morris, I'm just afraid that this company is not going to do well." And at the time, I have to admit, I thought, well, this little college graduate, she sure thinks she kind of has the edge on wisdom here. And I did not believe her because they were doing so well. But she said, "Mrs. Morris, I think they're not going to do well because they seem to just be complacent. They seem to be satisfied with this patent. But this patent is due to expire in 3 to 4 years. And once it does, I'm afraid they're going to lose a big piece of the market." Now, they were established, they had done well, and certainly places trusted them, but her concern was that there was no improvement on the patent they had. And you know what? Sure enough, that patent, patents are what, about 20 years? You might know a little bit more of that business there. But when their patent for that particular multiple, they had a dual flavored machine, when that ran out, you understand that a patent means they have the ability to sell it and nobody else does. But meanwhile, their competition is looking at and saying, you know what, if they can have a two-flavored one, perhaps we could make a three or a four-flavored one. And that's exactly what happened. The competition began creating cappuccino dispensers that were more than the two. They were able to speed up the process. They were able to enhance the technology. And that business has completely gone under. In 10 years, they went from being the pinnacle, literally globally, owning the corner of the market when it came to these cappuccino machines, and now they are almost under. I spoke with one of their vice presidents a few years after they were starting their decline, and she said, "Oh, Angela, we have started something new. We're going to create a new product." And I thought, whew, well, good for you. This will help you. She said, "We're making dispensers for mashed potatoes that we can put into, like student lounges and things like that." And I thought, mashed potato dispensers? That just doesn't even sound good to me. And perhaps somebody would use it for the novelty of it one or two times. And, have you ever been anywhere and seen a mashed potato dispenser? I think that tells you, unfortunately, how well that business is doing. And it's just not, it is almost out of existence. That is requisite variety. We dare not, in the organizations we're involved in, we dare not in the schools we're involved in, we dare not in the churches we're involved in, just be willing to stay at the status quo where we were. We have to keep striving, not changing our moral compass, but striving to keep reaching out, striving to keep improving, so that we can make sure that we have the best available product for a business, or the best available outreach for a church, or the best available education for a school. Now, there it is. You're going to see it every time in our field. We want to be able to make generalizations about the way people communicate. Why? Because it impacts the communication itself. So, a couple things I need you to recognize: that when it comes to PR work and things of mass media, a lot of this hinges upon perception and then the actual selection of the message. All right, so the perception and the selection. What do I mean? Public relations is essential to business and corporations with respect to image in times of growth, in times of change, and in times of crisis. So you've got three really major things there. As you're growing, how is your PR working? As you're changing, how is your PR changing with you? And in times of crisis, how is your PR functioning? And we've talked about a couple crisis situations before. And again, we'll hit on some key things that organizations just really, really need to do. But in times of growth, sometimes people fear that you will change. Oh, if you're growing, perhaps you'll forget about the little guy. So then you have to, as a business, assure them we're not changing just because we're growing. Right. First of all, perception and selection. When we're dealing with perception and selection, as we think of a school situation, sometimes that depends on gender, sometimes it depends on age, but your perception and your selection of a school. When you think about where you chose to go to school, what were some of your perceptions? Perhaps those of you who have attended Maranatha on campus, what was your selection partly based upon your perception? And if so, what was your perception of the school? How did you get that perception of the school? For some students, their parents attended. And because their parents attended, they say, well, you know what? This is my perception of the school. My parents got a quality education, and so that is very important to me. Some people visit campus and they say it's very, very friendly. That's the kind of school I want to go to. What's your perception? Then how does that impact your selection? The other major, major role is the actual experience. The experience. For example, go back to age. If I were to talk about school to someone who was in their 70s, I can almost guarantee you school would hold one of two memories. The first memory would be a one-room schoolhouse where you had all the grades and one teacher, and that must have just been an absolutely phenomenal situation. I cannot imagine a teacher being able to have that broad of an ability to teach. I just give them such credit. But if you talk to somebody in 2010, they might say, well, my experience is that I was at home sitting at my kitchen table and I was taking some classes. So you then as a communicator have to recognize how perception and the selection of the perception and how experience can impact your communication, because that should help you mold and shape the message. And that is just, whew, that is quite another lecture in and of itself, so I'm just going to have to just throw that out at you. But understand how you have to craft messages for different audiences. So what is public relations specifically then? It's a commercial campaign planned on behalf of an organization that falls into either marketing or advertising or the broader sense of public relations itself. All right, so marketing, you've got a new product. How are you going to sell it? And oftentimes then that folds over into advertising. Where, we've talked about this before, where are you going to put your advertising? How are you going to put your advertising? How much money are you going to put into your advertising? I was listening to a situation recently here in Wisconsin, and you had two candidates running for a very, very key position in the state. And the analysis was of how they both really have the exact same, what they believe in is almost parallel. All right, so to differentiate these gentlemen as far as their voting record would be very, very difficult. But a key aspect was that one man was almost exclusively funding his own campaign to the tune of $1 million or so. He's quite he's a successful businessman, and so he has the ability to do it. The other man is not a businessman, but 86% of his campaign is being funded from external sources. Do you understand the difference there? So you've got some people saying, all right, well, we're glad that candidate A has millions of dollars to spend, but notice there aren't a lot of people necessarily giving to his campaign. But he is a businessman who's been very successful. Candidate B hasn't necessarily been a businessman. He has been in politics, but he's got 86% of his funding coming from non-personal bank account. So very, very interesting. Those are all aspects of marketing, advertising, and public relations. And it can be done for anything, not only for political candidates, but do you remember when it used to be that Wisconsin had sold the most milk in America, and we were known as the dairy state. And sadly, we have slipped behind California. And how on earth does California market milk? Well, they started that very funny campaign. Do you remember it? About the happy cows. You'd see cows traipsing through a snowstorm and trying to run away. And obviously, California is joking about how Wisconsin has sad cows. But California cows are happy because they have the sunshine. I mean, really, absolutely fascinating and brilliant campaign. How do you get a state to become a dairy state? Well, it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of good product, but then marketing. Marketing is crucial. A lot of us are familiar with the progressive commercials and the little girl with her little progressive, that little quote unquote gun that she walks around with and she tries to help people save money. It's not really a gun, she's scanning the cost of their insurance. But Progressive has been very, very successful as of recent regarding the campaigns. What about the Gecko? Very funny campaign. It's very memorable, and a lot of times that's the goal. The goal of PR is just to get you to remember a company and remember what it stands for. Now, we're going to discuss just a couple PR disasters. Again, you say, well, you're just rubbing their face in it. No, you can learn from history, then we can learn to avoid these things. And wherever God puts you into whatever kind of a situation, whether it's with your church, whether it's with your company, whatever it's with, learn from the mistakes of others. Firestone. You all should go and do some research on the Bridgestone Firestone tires and the complete fiasco. But Bridgestone at the time had been one of the top tire sales in America. If you wanted the top, you go for Bridgestone Firestone. And in the year 2000, they recalled 6.5 million 6.5 million tires. And one of the issues was that these tires had been linked specifically to deaths and even more accidents. Now, Firestone was unwilling to come out and claim responsibility. So you began having these deaths and you began having these experiences. And the common denominator seemed to be the tires back in 2000. And Firestone, instead of being willing to admit that perhaps they were the problem, they just kept saying, nope, it's not us, nope, it's not us, nope, it's not us, unwilling to take any responsibility. What did they do? Well, they tried to point fingers. And sometimes you'll see companies do this. Sometimes, unfortunately, pointing a finger will work. But most often, it really doesn't. And I think a lot of that is now the age of technology that we live in. There is just too much information available at the tips of the consumer, the fingertips of the consumer. So first of all, Bridgestone tried to blame the consumers. Their claim was the consumers did not rotate the tires enough. If you own a car, you know that you're supposed to rotate your tires, and that helps with helping extend the life of the tires and the safety of the tires. So Bridgestone first said, well, it's the consumers. Well, when you do that, what are you claiming? That our customers are stupid, that our customers don't know what they're doing. That was not a smart move. And it really alienated a lot of customers. When that didn't work, then Bridgestone tried to blame the Ford Motor Company because Ford had the big lock on using Bridgestone on those particular cars. And so then Bridgestone tried to say, well, it's not really our fault. Ford was putting them on wrong. Well, now not only have you alienated your consumer, Bridgestone began to alienate their number one customer as far as the Ford Motor Company that was putting these tires on the brand new vehicles in the plant. Complete PR disaster. It was absolutely a fiasco. And what began happening then was we actually had some journalists who began doing very thorough journalistic reports, and you can see by these pictures how awful and how horrifically these tires were actually imploding on the road. You see on the upper left hand, it just going down right to the wheel. You see the tread blown off the bottom left one, and then sadly, you began having over the internet and in newspapers and magazines these graphic pictures of these vehicles that had been in horrific, tragic accidents because the tires were blowing out. Now, finally, after after several weeks and even some months of heavy-handedness from, the people began suing them. My loved one lost his or her life, and it was not our fault. You were making a defective product, became the claim. It began just hitting. In the day of as much information as we have, it's pretty hard to stifle the truth for very long, isn't it? And you began seeing uh, cartoons like this in the newspaper. I warned him about the Firestone recall. In other words, you can't even trust a little tire swing anymore. And the children, I mean, it really, the buffeting that Firestone took was amazing. And basically, the public was saying, just tell the truth. Just admit you made a shoddy product, turn around and fix the product and, give some due repair to those who have been injured. Move on to AIG. Do you remember this disaster? I hope you do. You need to start watching for means of communication. Watch for failed, perhaps, means of communication. Start following this, all right? Now that you're in college, perhaps almost done with college, you need to be a wise discerner of communicative situations. Where did they go wrong? Where did they fail? What could they have done? Do you remember AIG at all? Boy, they had a lot of people mad at them, didn't they? Why? Because they received $85 billion in government bailout money, only to provide a $500,000 retreat in December, just a few months after the bailout, and grant millions to their top executives for bonuses. And their response was, well, we have to give these bonuses because they're just part of a contract, and a contract is legally binding. Well, let me tell you, when news of AIG's enormous bonuses, news of AIG's taking their $500,000 retreat hit the newspaper stands, people were furious, and people began withdrawing their money from some of the AIG funds. Why? Now, is it true, perhaps, that these bonuses were a part of a contract? I believe with all my heart it probably is legally binding that you're supposed to give it a contract. But I've also been aware of the fact that there are times when corporations say, this is part of it, you're going to have to let us just work this out, okay? These are people who are doing just fine. They're making more than six figures, and I think in light of what was going on in the recession back then, completely unwise of AIG to do this extravagant $500,000 retreat. It was bad public relations. You may or may not be familiar with this young lady by the name of Arian O'Connell. Now, she was an elementary school teacher, and she decided that she was going to run the San Francisco Marathon. You have to understand this. The way the San Francisco Marathon had set it up was that they were going to have a group of, like A runners, and those were going to be your fastest runners. And they started those at a particular time. Then they had another grouping of their marathon runners, and those started at a different time. So just for example, if you had your fastest runners and you were going to start them at 10 a.m., and then you had your next set of runners and they were going to start at 10:30, and then your next set of runners was going to start at 11. Okay? And Nike just assumed that somebody in that first batch of runners at the 10 a.m. departure, they just assumed that somebody from there was going to win. So everybody, runs the race. They get their clocking, and obviously your clocking then is based upon when you departed. So Arian said she stood there at the end, and they're getting to the point she knew she had run really well. She was pretty excited. She had run one of her best times. And they stood there and they began giving the trophies out. And the time for the third place winner came, and Arian's time was faster. And she said, oh, maybe, maybe I placed. And then she heard the second place time, and she knew she was faster than that. And she couldn't believe it, and her heart began pounding. She thought, I have won this marathon. This is amazing. And then they announced the first place winner, and it was not Arian. And they gave the time, and her competitive time, was faster than the one that had won. So afterwards, she went right over to the judging table, kind of showed them her card, however they do it, and said, but look at my time. I beat these winners. I am the actual, I should be walking away with the trophy right now. And The people at the table looked at it, and uh-oh, there was a problem. One of the biggest issues is when we're not willing to admit there's a mistake. And they said, well, we can't give you the victory because you weren't in. It departed at 10 a.m. and because the normal people who would have been running didn't know that you were running that fast, it's not fair to them. They had a disadvantage, and therefore you cannot win. And they just really poo-pooed her and sent her away, thinking nothing would come of it. Remember, she's an elementary teacher, and she had all the proof that she had run the entire marathon, that she had won the entire marathon. Somehow, news of her story got out. Now, when a company makes a mistake, what does the competition do? Well, oftentimes the competition attempts to make it to their own advantage, right? So here's this wonderful little elementary teacher who goes against all odds, wins this major marathon, and Nike is refusing to give her credit. So what does Reebok do? Reebok says Nike just blew it. Some of the other people, that was one of the headlines. Nike just blew it. I shouldn't say Reebok did that, but Reebok did hear the story and took major um, media here. And they went to her school during the class day. They gave her a check for $2,500. Now, really, how much was that to Reebok? That was nothing. They fitted her entire class with free shoes, and they gave her a set of free shoes, and they just had a major photo op. Went to the school, you had the parents there, you had the school board members there, it's hitting the local newspapers. Reebok just ate up Nike's failure. And that's oftentimes what happens when companies are unwilling to be completely honest and can be completely upfront. Listen, it's a real lion, vicious, ferocious atmosphere out there, and so if the competition can hone in on a mistake of yours, they're going to do everything they can to just let that mistake out. How about in 2008? Do you remember this news story? These were the 3 top executives from Ford and GM and Chrysler, and they flew to Washington to ask Congress for $25 billion in bailout money. They flew in their own private corporate jets, and they didn't even have a plan of attack. That just aggravated the American people. That was all over the news. That was all over the media. That was all over the internet and the radio and the television. Why? Because you had 3 top players who had the gall to use private jets to go ask for tax dollars, in essence, and they didn't even have a plan. I mean, can you imagine on a much smaller scale, if as a teacher I go to the president of Maranatha and say, I really think that I need, $30,000 for my department. And he says, well, how do you propose that I come up with this money? Well, I don't know. What are you going to do, to help have this further help your department? Well, I don't know. I'm just asking for 30,000. You'd say, well, that's ridiculous, and there's the door, right? Well, that's exactly what Congress did to the top 3. And the top 3 were completely stunned. They were just arrogant. They just went to Washington assuming they'd get this money, and they did not. Second time they came, they drove their own little private hybrids. But you know what? A little bit too little, too late. Some of those companies did get money, but they infuriated the public in the meantime. Here's another pretty major disaster. If you look at this map that I'm showing you, now I am not an advocate of drinking. Okay, don't walk away from here saying, oh, Mrs. Morris has a vodka ad. Okay, you know me. I don't drink. I don't believe in social drinking. I think it's wrong. But this still remains a very good example of a really poor ad campaign. Do you see why? Look at this picture. What's the issue? Notice how Mexico was drawn to take up almost half of the United States. Ah, there's an issue, isn't it? Okay, that really angered an awful lot of the American public. And an absolute world, because the name of the vodka is Absolute Vodka. But really angered a lot of people. And you say, well, that's just, so what? Okay, listen, ad campaigns have lots and lots of eyes that look at them. Somebody obviously failed to really look at details here. And you angered an awful lot of Americans and angered a lot of your possible clientele. Here's a situation. Let me read this to you because it really is tragic. Okay, this was a part of a news brief. That a collision with a tractor trailer 7 years ago left 52-year-old Deborah Shank permanently brain damaged in a wheelchair. Now, if you look at the picture on the right, Deborah Shank is the one in the middle. And she is just a lovely mother, isn't she there, with a beautiful smile? Her husband, Jim, and her 3 sons found a small source of solace, a $700,000 accident settlement from the trucking company that was involved. So she was at work and she was injured, and it was terrible and it was tragic. The picture at the bottom is Deborah Shank after the injury. Obviously, just permanent damage. Tragic, tragic situation. Now, they won this $700,000 settlement. That's really not that much because you have to understand lawyers have earned their fees. And so what did they receive, the family? $417,000. Just put into a special trust fund to be used for her care. And you know what, when you've got brain damage like that, it's very, very expensive. And it's never going to bring back the wife and the mother. Tragic situation. But now, what happened? Instead of that actually going to their family, it's going to go over to Walmart. Now listen, I shop at Walmart. I like Walmart. I'm very pro Walmart, but I think Walmart blew it in this situation. Why? Because 2 years ago, the retail giant's health insurance sued the Shanks. They went back and they sued the family. They wanted $470,000 in return that it had actually spent on Deborah Shank's medical care. Remember, she had been an employee at Walmart, and you can go online and read up about this. I would encourage you to. And a federal judge ruled last year in Walmart's favor, backed by an appeals court decision in August. Now, just based on the laws, from what I can understand, the judge made the right decision. But what happened? Now Deborah's family has to rely on Medicaid and Social Security payments to try to keep her round-the-clock care paid for. You say, well, okay, what's going on here? Well, understand we talked about perception. So what's the perception of the public? The perception of the public is, here's this family, experiences a deep tragedy, and here is a giant when it comes to stores. And they sued this family for $470,000 in the medical realm. Now, technically, did Walmart have the right to sue? Technically, yes. Legally, did they have the right to sue? Legally, yes. But what was the PR disaster? Well, MSNBC's Keith Olbermann awarded the company the Worst Person of the Year award for 4 straight nights following the decision that had been made. Why? It just makes Walmart look like a big bully. It makes Walmart appear as if they don't care for their customers. Now, again, did they have the legal right to do this? Yes. Am I suggesting that they did anything wrong? No, I'm not suggesting that. What am I suggesting? That you have to recognize that there are often steps to PR disasters. I want you to go ahead and write these down. Understand the steps as you look at a lot of these, the Nike situation and the Firestone situation and the Walmart situation. What do I want you to know? Well, first, there's an initial problem. Oftentimes, it's a minor problem that goes uncorrected. All right, if we think of the Nike, you handed the trophy to the wrong person. All right, initially that could be a very minor problem. Somebody should have just said, you know what, you won. Let us make you another trophy. We're not necessarily going to go withdraw the trophies that we've already handed out, but let us fix the wrong. So initially, and by the way, that did not happen, right? But initially, there is a problem. Next, there's a subsequent problem that compounds the initial problem, usually in conjunction with an inept attempt at correction. All right, so you've got your initial problem first. Then what happens? Then there's a subsequent problem that compounds the initial problem. Actually, I think if you go back to the Nike situation, the initial problem would be they should have allowed for the possibility that anybody could win. And those in charge obviously had very limited understanding of the fact that, hey, you can have a no-name actually win a major marathon. So your initial problem would probably be they didn't allow for anybody else outside of Group A to win. Then there's the subsequent problem. The subsequent problem in Nike would be somebody in Group B won. Third, there's disbelief at the accelerating seriousness. If you think of Firestone, you had some tires blowing out, you had some initial crashes, and Firestone said, I don't think this is a big deal. We're just going to kind of shove it under the carpet. It's no big deal. There's disbelief. Fourth, there's an attempt to hide the truth about what is going on. Hide the truth. And very clean. We should not tell lies. And I think when it comes to businesses, when it comes to schools, when it comes to churches, we have just got to keep that in the forefront of our mind. And now even the unsaved are saying, you know what? When you don't tell the truth, you can have some major issues. So you've got initial problem that can be compounded by a subsequent problem. Step 3, there's just disbelief at how bad this could be. Fourth, then, oftentimes there's an attempt to hide the truth. Fifth, then, is this sudden recognition that the situation is out of control. Unfortunately, steps 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 are going on for a while in some companies, and finally they realize, uh-oh, out of control situation, what are we going to do now? And so then what do they do finally? There's a play out of the ultimate disaster scenario, recriminations involving significant loss of reputation, financial resources, or both. In other words, once you have this disaster in number 1 and you've got some other things that might heighten the disaster, then step 3, you just don't believe that this is really going to be that serious. So 4, you try to hide and suppress the truth. And 5th, ultimately, the truth comes out, everything begins imploding, and then you end up with what? A significant loss of reputation and a significant loss of financial resources. It happened to AIG. It happened to Chrysler and Ford. We could have thrown Toyota in there. They've had some major issues as well where they tried to kind of suppress the truth of what was kind of happening in some of the accidents. And people just stopped buying Toyotas. That's not me trying to slam Toyota. These are just attempts to show you real situations. I'm not anti any of these organizations, but you have to realize we've had significant PR disasters and we can learn from them. What's one of the biggest lessons you can learn? You can win the battle, but you may lose the war. And so you have to stop and say, truth has to prevail. Sometimes we do make mistakes. It would have been far better for Firestone to come out and just say, you know what? We had a flawed product, and we intend to fix it, and we're going to try to compensate the people who were driving the vehicles, their families who were hurt. But they didn't do that. They tried to hide the truth. They tried to push the blame off on somebody else, and they had significant financial losses. So companies go through difficult times. Schools might go through difficult times. Churches may have difficult experiences. I think one of the key things is, number 1, we put our best foot forward, but 2, we always put our best foot forward in honesty, trying to just be as truthful as we can regarding the situation, and then do our best to recognize that if there is a mistake, make an admission, and then try to make things better without covering up the truth. A lot for you to digest on, and I trust you do, and I trust it helps you to be just the most honest businessman, pastor, youth pastor, or public school teacher, or whatever venue God leads you into. Honesty is the best policy, but don't